let us continue on with the third and final part of the human condition, once again looking at it from the perspective of three components making up the whole. And this third part is often referred to as a soldier's prayer. And once again, if we were to look at this from the perspective of a 6-part series, this would be made up of parts 5 and 6. So it's either parts 5 and 6 or the third part. In either event, we have the concluding chapter or chapters of this remarkable epic cinematic achievement known as Ningen no Jouken, or the human condition. So as this is in many ways a type of linear story, or it's presented in a linear way, we have at the focus and center of these proceedings the main character played by Tatsuya Nakadai, and this main character is Kaji. And Kaji is now confronting a number of various very grave circumstances that are picking up from where we left off at the conclusion of the second part. So if you recall, he is now a soldier. However, he has seen firsthand the horrors of direct combat and battle with Soviet forces on the other side, and the grave consequences and the human toll, the horrible, terrifying human toll that results as a part of, or as a result of, this particular ground battle that he and his comrades have encountered. And now we see him and the remaining survivors, as it were, trying to pick up the pieces in terms of regrouping and relocating and finding out exactly how they can help themselves and ultimately try to or endeavor to escape from this particular situation. And this involves, in this third part, a number of different layers, as we have come to expect in a beautiful and majestic and poetic manner, as in the hands of the great artist Masaki Kobayashi. So first off, we have one of the levels of regrouping after this terrible and horrific battle that has taken place, and also Kaji as a character having to deal with the specifics of what he has done and what he has committed as a result of this battle, or in relation to this particular battle, and the moral ground, or perhaps lack of moral ground, that he views himself in terms of, is he, in his own eyes, a human being, or is he a monster? Is he a individual that is capable of empathy and views of a humane way, or is he one that is a killer or a murderer, and someone who cannot avoid or evade a sense of guilt? And so this becomes one of the foundational layers of the character arc of Kaji, and how he is dealing with his own humanity, and how he's dealing with the various threats and challenges to such humanity that we have seen built up from the very first part into the second part, and now in this concluding chapter, as it were. So this is one layer in terms of the ever proceeding, or the ever continuing character arc of Kaji in the direct consequences and his direct actions. Once again, in this context, we have the idea of cause and effect, choice, and the results of the things that we either witness people doing or we ourselves do. And when I say we, I mean the individualized subjective viewpoint as represented by the main character of Kaji, the Tatsuya Nakadai character. So this is one very crucial factor that we see play itself out in this third and final component. Related to this too also is the notion of choice, and the notion of how our choices, or Kaji's choices, affect the people around him. And this becomes a very key component when we see the efforts of Kaji and also the various characters that he meets along the way from the second part into this final part, including, I should say, a group of civilians, when he is trying essentially to make his way to find some kind of possibility or hope of escape And here we have a number of people relying on his leadership and expertise. Then we get a very harrowing and quite a terrifying episode or series of episodes in this third part, dealing with survival, dealing with hunger, dealing with lack of food, dealing with the people on the brink. And this is in terms of a psychological breaking point, but also a physical one, because this series of dire consequences really is dire, because it leads to the potential loss of life, or in fact, indeed, the actual loss of life. And in that context, how will Kaji, as a character, react to this, respond to this, justify it, if it is at all justifiable in his eyes? This is yet again another example of the series of choices or dilemmas that confront Kaji, that have confronted Kaji in various forms and guises from the very beginning, but now in this context as a soldier, or perhaps in the eyes of certain Japanese troops that he meets along the way, a deserter of sorts. Now we see a different mode, that of a human being trying to survive and also trying to plan out the survivals of as many people that he can, despite the odds being so very terrifyingly stacked against them. And so here is yet another level that is at the very forefront of the exploration in this third component. And yet another example, or another layer, is what something that I mentioned just now, or referred to in passing just now, which is the reaction, the external forces as represented by the various Japanese troops that the Kaji and this group encounter along the way, and their reactions to him. This idea of the warped and absurd nature of authoritarian or authority application. And this is described in the specific context of troops that are seen, or soldiers in the position of Kaji, that are regarded as having deserted their post, even though the people that are doing the criticizing don't fully comprehend or not fully cognizant of the absolutely horrific situation, the military situation that Kaji and his men were facing. And in fact, Kaji showed himself to be a very capable soldier and human being who was, from a certain point of view, very able to handle himself, even though it was an incredibly terrifying situation. Despite those circumstances, he and his fellow surviving soldiers are seen as deserters, because through some kind of sense or absurdist sense of an adherence to authority and power and the structured systems, they are seen to have not obeyed the orders of their superiors, even though we understand what has happened to their superiors in battle, military superiors. And so this lends itself to another absurdist view, another view of the chaotic, warped sense of how power is applied in these power structures, in this militaristic power structure. We have seen this applied in the first film, or the first component, in the guise or in the form of the Kempei-Tai interaction specifically, and then in the second component in the guise or in the form of the military training personnel and also the military in action. And now we see it in a similar yet alternative view, which is also in the soldier military aspect, but also from the outsider's perspective, the outsider looking in, or the outsider being the subject of this ridicule or attack, which is, from our vantage point, absurd, odd, strange, unfounded, and quite warped indeed. And this is part of the overall critique that is being applied by Gomikawa and Kobayashi and company here, in respect of the absurdity of war and the type of absurdist nature of the power structures during wartime Japan, as personified by these particular episodes. This also brings in yet another very key, crucial component of the entire human condition, but in particular as made evident in this third part, and that is the views towards socialism and socialism and communism, and these regimes as exemplified or represented in the eyes of Kaji and many other soldiers like him, in the form of, say, Soviet Russia and the conception of some kind of utopia, or perhaps in the context of other soldiers, some kind of hope or desire or dream to find some kind of, say, military salvation in the form of an alliance or some kind of teaming up with Chiang Kai-shek, or that kind of geopolitical consideration that finds itself in various permutations as Kaji and company go from place to place or meet people along the way. And so this, of course, lends itself or leads to the question of the internal faith structure with the imperialist militaristic complex of wartime Japan, and how it is, in a sense, crumbling from the inside, because we see the loyalty linkages breaking in favor of a more, what's deemed to be a more successful survivalistic allegiance, depending on, as I say, who Kaji meets. And then this leads to a further developing of the theme that we saw established from the very outset. That is Kaji and his view of the socialism and its structures, and also how it is applied in practice, in real time, as it were, and how it's applied not just to the people that he witnesses, but also as it's applied to him. Because we know that in this third part, he becomes a prisoner in this type of camp, the Soviet forces run camp, a prisoner of war. And he, in that process or in that situation, comes face to face, firsthand, with the harrowing and frightening consequences of that type of status and being in that position of a power structure. The power structure government might be different. It might be on the opposite side of any type of structure that he, Kaji, has up to now found himself in. After all, if we go back to the first part of this entire cycle of the human condition, we recall that Kaji's story as essentially a civilian working with this mining company was in a position of authority vis-a-vis the laborers that were the Chinese laborers and the POW prisoners that were, in a sense, prisoners under the regime, the power structure that he was a direct part of. Now, in the third part, the tables are turned, and he, Kaji, is now a prisoner. And now the people in authority, or the perspective of authority, is now down upon him, and it is the Soviet regime that is now part of this, or now is the power structure, wherein he becomes a prisoner and also a victim. And it is a very shocking way, or it's a shocking set of, say, situations that leads him to not just question his own beliefs as to initially his viewpoint of a utopian egalitarian society, or hopes and dreams of that sort as a type of solution to this imperialistic and militarism that we see in wartime Japan. That is the focus of the critique by Kobayashi. It's not just that, but also what are seen by the Kobayashi and Gomikawa, and also as exemplified through Kaji in what happens to him, and also the way in which his viewpoint is altered. Is the critique is also aimed at these power structures that are, in a sense, these power structures of socialism and communism, and the actual fact of the mistake of the viewpoint of the utopian egalitarian hope, because in fact the actuality is horrifyingly much different from the dream and the fantasy vision. And we figure this out, and Kaji finds this out firsthand. We see the idea of the collaborator or the conspirator. We also see the notion of the way in which the defeated Japanese soldiers and prisoners are treated, because once they were in situations or positions of power and authority, but now that they have been subjugated to positions of prisoners and the defeated, we see the results of that, again, as exemplified in various specific episodes that involve Kaji and his interactions, say, not just with Soviet forces, but also with certain Chinese people that he encounters through various circumstances. So in many ways, the tables become turned. And this is, of course, a reflection of the historical consequences of Japan and its wartime imperialist, and also pre-war as well, imperialist militaristic presence, and the horrifying consequences of that, both in terms of what was caused and what is caused, what was caused and what is caused. And so, and it is all shown through and refracted through this centralized story of Kaji. And indeed, too, we see the terrifying and tragic consequences of this in terms of his worldview, in terms of his physical state, in terms of where he is, who is he, where does he belong, does he have a place, does he have some kind of moral ground to stand on at the end of the day, or is that moral ground totally lost to him, and is he totally bereft, and is he an individual without any sense of place or belonging? And in that sense, is he one of a particular group, or is he on his own, isolated and alone forever? And if this is the case, then what is the consequence not just to his soul and to his morality, but to himself? What is the consequence to him as a person and to his feelings and emotions? This is represented, of course, through that crucial key relationship between Kaji and Michiko. And we have seen this relationship and everything that has gone through, that such relationship has gone through all the way from the beginning part into the middle part, and now in this final component. And indeed, the crucial aspect of the importance, the fundamental importance to Kaji of this relationship between himself and Michiko, I think is further highlighted and augmented and emphasized in the words and in the actions and in the state of mind and the state of feelings that we the viewers see Kaji go through throughout this third part, all the way up to the very end, and the ultimate conclusion to the story of this main character of Kaji and everything that he has gone through and everything that he represents, both as a symbol or as a representation of the consequences of Japan and its wartime activities on the one hand, and also on the intimate nature of the impact of this type of effort on the lives of individual human beings, and all the dilemmas and all the moral complexities that confronted them and that still confront them, and ultimately, what those consequences are to a person's physical well-being, mental well-being, spiritual well-being, and emotional well-being. What happens? What are the consequences? This is, I think, at the very heart of this third part, and also, taking a step back, it is at the very heart of the human condition. In those ways, this is very much a type of anti-war film, one of the greatest anti-war films of Japanese cinema, and it is one that is unflinching. It doesn't hesitate to show us the darkness and the horror and the tragedy, and it doesn't hesitate to show us and to make us think about these consequences and how there is this transformation or perhaps transformative effect in the experiencing or in the engagement of this film on those themes. Again, to borrow the words of Shinoda, a type of a transcendental effect that this work has, even in the context of all the bleakness, even in the context of all the tragedy. Is there a type of hope? Is there some kind of salvation that can be found upon the engagement of this and upon the consideration and pondering of the stories here, the story of Kaji. That is up to us. That is up to you, the viewer. That is up to me. And when I watch the film, what do I get out of it? And what do I learn from it? Ultimately, though, whatever those answers might be for you as a viewer, ultimately what this presents, this third part and the entire human condition, is a one-of-a-kind, unforgettable, harrowing, tragic, horrifying representation, both on the macro level and on the intimate level, of the horrors of war, and who meets out those horrors, and how those horrors are confronted by others, and the choices and the consequences of those choices. Again, all centered around this journey of this central character, Kaji, in this work by Masaki Kobayashi, The Human Condition. In this third disc of this Blu-ray release, what we have is we have the third component of The Human Condition, and also we have a number of supplements. So just as with the earlier Criterion DVD release of The Human Condition, here we have a supplement that is an interview in 2009 with the actor Tatsuya Nakadai. And this is approximately 17 minutes. And this is so extraordinary and such a wonderful interview. Of course, Tatsuya Nakadai's contribution to the human condition, the cinematic representation, the cinematic work, is so essential, because he is the central character. His character and what it goes through is the heart and soul of this work. And so to be carried by the breathtaking beauty and magnificence, the magnificent nature of Nakadai's performance, that makes this interview and interviews like it so essential. And I'm so glad it was carried over from the earlier DVD release. It's fantastic. Now, for example, Nakadai talks about, for instance, the issue of casting Kaji. This, remember, the underlying work, the underlying novel writing by Gomikawa was already well known in the mid-1950s. And so when news came around of the film that was about to be made, then, of course, it came to who would be cast as Kaji. And it's so interesting to hear Nakadai's comments about this, and what were the circumstances that essentially led to his casting. He does talk a little bit about his work with Kobayashi prior to The Human Condition. He talks a little bit about his career prior to The Human Condition and the types of roles that he was in terms of, say, smaller or minor or supporting role types. But here we have a role that he is front and center, the main star. And so there's a really lovely anecdote that he shares with us, something he heard about how there was something about the way that Kobayashi saw Nakadai looking at the moon, and the way that his eyes were looking at the moon one particular moment. And according to Nakadai, what he heard was that this was the moment that Kobayashi, the director, had decided to cast Nakadai, because this recalls, or this is very much part of, or his eyes and his look is a very key component in terms of the use of close-ups in this, the Miyajima camera work, of course, but also there is a very famous scene involving Nakadai and the snow in the third part. And if you know the work, you know what I'm talking about, because the look on his face is very important. The look in his eyes is essential. And it's really wonderful, therefore, to hear Nakadai recall this story about the look in his eyes and Kobayashi, and perhaps that being one of the reasons that he was cast. And my goodness, the world of cinema was not the same since, because this is a towering performance from Nakadai, and it's therefore great to hear that story. Also, Nakadai does posit or does theorize about how Kaji, the character, is Kobayashi. Also, Kaji is Gomikawa, and so this is a really great insight into the positioning and the viewpoints and perspectives of Kaji as they reflect, in his views anyway, as they reflect the viewpoints and perspectives of Gomikawa and Kobayashi. And this is something that is, I think, a very strong hypothesis that we have seen supported very well in many of the comments that we saw in some of the other supplements, comments from Masaki Kobayashi himself in that early 90s interview with Shinoda, and also the talk from Shinoda from 2009 that's on disc 2. And so the idea is that here we have reflected in Kaji and in his viewpoint and in his experiences, both as a civilian and also as a soldier, those experiences and viewpoints of Gomikawa and Kobayashi. And so from there, Nakadai tells us or informs us about how that was where he could get the inspiration, as it were, for a number of the scenes of his performance as Kaji. Also, he talks about inspiration. He talks about how he and a number of the other actors that were involved in a lot of the military-related scenes, they underwent some military drills or military training. And he also talks about working with other very famous actors, because we know that all of the human condition, we have so many famous actors of Japanese cinema, and to learn from them and to get to know them and to work with them on the set and also on location. For Nakadai, he explains how, or expresses how, it was such a great experience working with these actors. And he recalls one particular, working with one particular actor as an example. This is So Yamamura. And So Yamamura appears in the first part. And so, Nakadai in this interview mentions how there was an instance perhaps where he tried or he endeavored to change some of the dialogue from the script, and Yamamura actually took him aside and he said, "You shouldn't change any of the dialogue, don't change any of the lines." And he explains, and I'm paraphrasing, about how Nakadai was explaining how the actor told him that these are lines that the scriptwriter and the filmmakers took great care in choosing the words for and to find the rhythm in terms of the written word. And so it's not right for us to change the words after all this thought and consideration was invested in creating them in the first place. And this was, according to Nakadai, such a wonderful learning moment for him as an actor. And from that point on in his career, according to Nakadai, he never endeavored to change any of the lines from the script. Of course, he says there might have been instances where they had to make some alterations or adjustments that were mutually discussed and agreed upon. That's, of course, that happens all the time, according to Nakadai. But what he's referring to is the actor sort of unilaterally changing the dialogue. And based on this piece of advice from Yamamura, he never did so during the rest of the shoot, and he never did so again throughout his career. And he's very grateful to Yamamura for that particular teaching moment. So that's such a very interesting anecdote. There's some other great anecdotes that he gives. For example, he shares with us the idea about how the shooting schedule, there was a part in, if we look at it in the 6-part sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there was a shooting of parts 1 and 2, and then he says there was a period of 6 months, and then they went and shot parts 3 and 4, and then another 6 months, and then they shot parts 5 and 6. And so overall, taking into account probably the preparation work that was needed prior to entering into those respective shoots, it was a very long process overall. And there are moments too, as we know from watching the human condition, the work itself, there are moments where Nakadai is subjected to so much physical intensity in terms of his performance. And so And you see it in his face and his visage and the way that he carries himself in his physical acting, and the fact that you can sense in his performance the toll that is being taken on his physical body in terms of the entire process. And so it is another indication of the greatness of his performance, just how much physicality is invested and how the emotional and psychological toll that needed to be shown through his performance. And he also mentions the anecdote, a very interesting anecdote, about how neither he nor Kobayashi got sick or fell ill during the shoot, which is an interesting anecdote indeed. So for these and other reasons, this discussion with Nakadai is another essential component. And then the supplements are rounded out with another trailer. And so we have the trailers for each of the discs, and then this third disc is another example of that. So we have the discussion with Nakadai and the trailer. Now, once again, I must echo or repeat the comments that I made in prior videos, which is that it might seem on paper that we are getting relatively little in quantity, especially considering that everything is taken from the earlier DVD release and perhaps nothing new is being added to this new Blu-ray release. However, I must emphasize once again that what we do get, what we got before and what we are getting now, which is the discussion from Kobayashi, an appreciation and discussion from Shinoda, and also this interview discussion with Nakadai, these are extraordinary. These are absolutely extraordinary. So please, if you are considering whether or not to get the Human Condition, the Criterion release, if you're still not sure, please, this is such an important example of Japanese cinema during the late 50s, early 60s. This is such an important example from such an important and brilliant filmmaker that is Masaki Kobayashi. And so if you are into Japanese cinema, this is, I think, an essential work, one of the most important works, often regarded, as I've said, as I've referred to, it's often regarded as one of, if not the greatest anti-war film of Japanese cinema. And so if you are still considering, I would strongly suggest it. And also the supplements themselves, the contents are extraordinary and essential. Now let me turn very briefly to the insert, which I have already taken out here. Now before I go any further, I should say that the look of the packaging is pretty much similar or about the same as the earlier DVD release. The earlier DVD release, however, is this larger digipack format, and so it has the inner casing and the outer shell, and it folds out like so to reveal the insert and also the disc compartments like so. So here for the Blu-ray, at least for the Blu-ray that I have, this is a plastic casing Blu-ray, so it's not a digipack. But in terms of the content, we have this similar type of fold-out leaflet style. I'm not a fan of the fold-out. I've mentioned that before. I would have much rather seen a staple booklet. But again, we see the essay, the brilliant essay by Philip Kemp, The Prisoner. And so I'm so glad this is now here for this Blu-ray release, because it is another remarkable, essential essay. Philip Kemp's comments are wonderful. And I'll get to Philip Kemp in a moment, because he actually appears in another release of this, The Human Condition. But it's great to have this essay. He also makes the argument very well about how this work can be regarded as one whole. And so for that and other reasons, please check out the Philip Kemp essay if you can. I did mention Philip Kemp and his relationship with another release, and that's this, which is the Arrow release. This is the box set. This is the Blu-ray and DVD dual format box set that I was able to get a few years back. And so here, and this is the booklet that comes with it, and you can see that you can take out the discs from the box, and they have these separate plastic cases and that go into the box like so. This was released a few years ago And before the Criterion Collection obviously released the Blu-ray set, we had this from the United Kingdom. This happens to be Region B and Zone 2 as far as the Blu-rays and DVDs that are included here. And it came with this very great booklet, and I'll get to this momentarily. So for a while we had, in terms of non-Japanese releases, we had first the Criterion release, the DVD release, and then some years later we had the Arrow Blu-ray DVD box set here, the special edition. And then now we have the Criterion Blu-ray release. Now I should say that the supplements are different. In this Arrow release, we have a introductory discussion from Philip Kemp himself, who's talking about Kobayashi, and he's giving us some details about Kobayashi's background and biography, and also the context in which he made these films, in particular the first part. And so this is another great conversation to have from Philip Kemp. And then, with respect to the films, we have certain scene select commentaries, also by Philip Kemp. Now, these are only for select scenes, so it's not for the entirety of the work, unfortunately. But it's great to have these select commentaries because we get the opportunity for Philip Kemp, or we get the opportunity to hear Philip Kemp talk about certain specific aspects of the scenes in question, or perhaps another opportunity for him to talk more broadly about Kobayashi and his career, and also the importance of Gomikawa and the underlying work, the human condition, etc. So these are great overall discussions and commentaries from Philip Kemp and company. So in that way, the Arrow box set is it's a really great one. And also the booklet here, the booklet by Arrow is really fantastic. It has a conversation with Masaki Kobayashi, and also there's an essay called Popular Representations of the Past, The Case of Post-War Japan by Naoko Shimazu. And this is an interesting essay. It's not focusing necessarily on the film per se, but it's more focusing on the historical context of Japan and wartime Japan. And so it gives, I think, further historical context in viewing the film itself, or the works themselves. And so it's an interesting inclusion, a very fascinating inclusion with this particular Blu-ray DVD special edition set from Arrow Academy. I should also say, too, that there's the option of watching the so-called international version versus the so-called Japanese version. So that's an interesting option that that you can select in the menus for each of the films, and that makes this Arrow box set or Arrow presentation different from the Criterion presentation. Now, the question is, which one is better? It really depends. I must say that I think both sets of supplements are really quite fascinating. They are different. I must say, however, that I am a really big fan of the Criterion supplements that we saw in the earlier DVD and now in the Blu-ray, because, as I was trying to suggest in these videos, we get the comments directly from Nakadai and also Kobayashi, and also the great appreciation of Kobayashi and this work from Shinoda. And so this collection of supplements and discussion is top notch. It would have been great, of course, if there were commentary tracks. My goodness, wouldn't it have been great if Philip Kemp and his discussion points were also included in this Criterion set? That would have been great. Or maybe there could have been one comprehensive set, who knows. Of course, that would have been perhaps ideal or something. But instead of that, we still get, I think, really strong releases, whatever you end up choosing. But the Criterion release is, I think, very solid indeed. Now, also, I should mention that we had the earlier DVD, which was purported to be based on this, at the time, it was declared to be this new restoration of the work, The Human Condition. And then we had these later subsequent releases. Now, very clear, at least to my eyes, that these presentations, these latter presentations are, I think they are a little bit brighter, and they open up the image much more. The DVD presentation was really great, don't get me wrong, but these presentations here, are the way in which the images are shown through these particular releases, is extraordinary, and they do feel like the image is opened up more. Also, excuse me, I should say that to my eye, it looks like the presentation that we saw in the Arrow release is actually the same as the presentation that we see here. And these are both described, the materials are described as having the presentations provided by Shochiku, and so, or the restoration undertaken by Shochiku. The difference, I suppose, being the aspect ratio that is described here. Now we have, before we had 2.35 to 1, now for the new Criterion Blu-ray, we have 2.39 to 1. But in any event, I think that what we are getting here, in either choice, is, to my eye, it is the same. And so whatever you end up choosing, I think you're going to get a splendid, splendid presentation with this picture that feels opened up, and the details are quite evident. And so once again, I really enjoy the earlier DVD from Criterion, but I really, really, really enjoy the presentation that we see in these two, which, as I say, to my eyes, we have the same type of presentation. And so in that spirit, I think whatever choice you have, or whatever version that you got or end up getting, I think you will be very much, well, let me say that either presentation will provide a great opportunity for engagement with the work. And that includes this new Criterion Blu-ray presentation. My goodness, this one is fantastic. Now, I should say, too, once again, that, again, it might seem disappointing to some that we don't get anything new, at least on paper, compared to the earlier DVD release. But once again, the look of the film is somewhat different than the earlier DVD presentation. Also, what I said earlier, which was the supplements that we had here were excellent to begin with. And so what we have is a carryover of supplements that were excellent to begin with, at least in my view. And so that makes this new Blu-ray presentation, I think, so top-notch. And if it gives an opportunity for more people to experience this and to try it out, then that makes me very, very, very happy indeed. So this is the overall Blu-ray release of this work. Again, it's spine number 480. This is Masaki Kobayashi's masterpiece, which is called Ningen no Jouken, or The Human Condition. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.